Hey there, everybody. This is Cory Huff from The Abundant Artist, and I am here with, Jeffrey Stoner, wildlife, animal, and nature photographer, and trained photographer, and lots of different things photographer. We are here today to talk a little bit about how Jeffrey's built his business, and we're going to dive straight into that. I want to talk a little bit about how I met Jeffrey and background. So Jeffrey's been on our Abundant Artist mailing list for a little while. I don't know exactly how long. And earlier this year, I sent a survey out after we opened up enrollment for a class and saying, hey, we noticed that you didn't enroll. Why not? And he's like, I don't need it. And he's like, gee, my sales were 30% higher than any previous year. And then through this year, they're doing so well. And I was like, well, what happened? What did you do? And he emails back and he's like, my business plan is a combination of gallery and website sales. And he's in multiple galleries, and we can talk a little bit about that. He's got a real specific strategy about how he picks the galleries that he goes into. And then he also sells his stuff online on his website and in a few other online marketplaces. So Jeffrey Stoner is, I think you said you're most well known for the Goats of Rowan.
Yes.
And we'll throw up some links in the comments here so you can see his website. It's jeffreystonerphotography.com. And Jeffrey, thank you very much for being with me here today.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. Awesome. So you, as you said in your email to me, you've got a specific strategy for the galleries that you approach. I'd love it if you could just expand on that a little bit. How do you pick the galleries that you go into?
Absolutely. When I first started, I was pretty much just trying to get into any gallery that would take me.
Sure.
And luckily, several of them did well. And I kind of do this a little bit roundabout. Mm-hmm. But when I wanted to go full time, I was working for a very good company and the best company I ever worked for. But because I did a lot of traveling, I could only take it so far. And I just had this bug that I really wanted to try to do photography as a business. So my wife and I talked, and we were like, yeah, we'll do this. And we ended up both leaving really good jobs. And we joked that we loaded up the truck and moved to Tennessee. But the reason was that there was a lot of tourism. We moved from central Pennsylvania.
Was that a Beverly Hillbillies joke?
Yes, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And in theory, I suppose we could have approached, galleries in Philadelphia, et cetera. But it just seemed with the amount of tourists that were coming into the Smoky Mountain region that was a place to go. So we moved there, and luckily got into a really good gallery that I had visited before we ever even talked about moving here. And at that point then, so I had this gallery, got into a couple others, but what I started to notice was the galleries that were successful were the ones that had tourism.
Right.
And specifically tourism, let's say adult tourism. So the area in Western North Carolina, for instance, there's a lot of adults with sometimes some kids, but they really come there for vacation, hiking, but also for the art.
Right.
So what I found was the galleries that have that type of tourism, adult tourism, versus, let's say, Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which is just tons of families with young kids. I'm in a gallery in Gatlinburg. It does okay, but just nothing compared to the galleries that are in tourist areas.
Right.
So I dropped some galleries last year, early this year, and was really just focusing my efforts even more in getting representation in the galleries in the tourism areas.
Nice. So you go into these, you're looking at places that have a lot of family tourism and putting your photographs there. How do you even figure out what places have galleries that are also popular family destinations?
Well, and again, it's mainly looking for adults, so couples versus couples with kids.
Right. Yeah.
But that's a good question. I think it's really, if you're just looking at the area, you're talking about, let's say, Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge. If you just drive through there, I mean, it's just there's the main attraction is, miniature golf and Bollywood. And so you can see that versus if you go to another town. Let me drop back. I really look for areas within probably 200 or so miles of my home, and then look for towns with galleries and initially do an online search of galleries, and then try to find the galleries within those areas that I think have potential, because you want galleries that fit you. So, I wouldn't want to, try to get into a gallery that just does, oil paintings. Just wouldn't fit. Mm-hmm. And then once I target a number of galleries in an area, then what I do is I visit the gallery as a customer. So I walk in there. I want to see how they greet me. Once they initially greet me, do they come back and follow up with me? Just how they handle themselves. And my most successful galleries are in Western North Carolina, and one of the top two is in Asheville. So I really wanted to get in Asheville because Asheville probably has 80 galleries. I mean, it's just this huge art town.
Sure.
It probably took me 5 years to find the gallery I wanted there, because I'd walk into a gallery and they wouldn't look up from their laptop, or if they did, they'd go back to their laptop, or they'd look at you and just assume, oh, you're not going to buy anything.
That's interesting. So you're mystery shopping the gallery essentially.
Basically, yes.
Yeah. And there's so many good things to pick out from what you just said, especially the assumption that you're not going to buy something, right? Like you walk in and maybe you're not wearing a tuxedo and you don't look like you have cash falling out of your back pocket. So they ignore you. And that is so interesting to me because living in Portland, we have like Portland rich people all look like they're, I don't know, like homeless or on vacation. And when I first interviewed for a job, when I first moved here, the CEO of the company interviewed me in jeans and a ripped up t-shirt. Right. And like, that's just sort of the culture here. And so there's these differences between the East Coast and the West Coast. And, you can meet very wealthy people here who look like they could barely afford a place to live. And that really cracks me up. So it's really observant of you to sort of pick up on that.
I think partly I worked for a company for a number of years that the owner, chairman of the board, decided at one point, I guess when the company got successful enough and he could delve into his hobbies, his hobby was farming.
Right.
So he went out and bought hundreds of acres, and then he bought the best equipment. But when he went to the bank or when he went shopping, he went in his dirty blue jeans and boots, and so I think maybe at a younger age, I learned that you can't judge a book by the cover. It just anyone can be your top customer, no matter what they look like.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. Okay, so you're going around and you're mystery shopping. You're seeing how the gallery staff interacts with you, what their reactions are. Anything else that you look for?
That's really it. And hopefully there's other customers in there.
Are you looking to see whether or not the art on the walls is a good fit for your work?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I try to do that even before I visit them. Mm-hmm. But then visiting them, of course, is even more important, because then you can actually there's a certain feel. I was trying to get into a gallery in the Hendersonville, North Carolina area, and there just wasn't anything that struck me. And then this past spring, my wife and I were driving back from South Carolina, and we stopped in at Hendersonville, and there was a new gallery. And I walked in and just immediately knew that I wanted to try to get into that gallery.
Nice.
It was a feel about it. The art looked appropriate, naturey, quirky. And as you mentioned, the goats are kind of quirky. So you want to find something that, the quirk fits. And luckily, they accepted me in there, and the timing was good because they were just, had an artist that was leaving. So timing worked.
Okay. So it sounds like you spent quite a bit of time figuring out where you want to be, what galleries you want to be in, and being really strategic about it, which is a different approach than a lot of artists take. I think a lot of artists sort of take a spray and pray approach where they try every gallery and hope that one of them works.
And I probably did that years ago.
Yeah. You mentioned in your email to me that a growing chunk of your sales are coming from the web. Can you kind of give us an overview of what that looks like for you?
Yeah, sure. Some of the web sales, and a lot of times it's really hard to tell exactly what's driving the people to your website. Mm-hmm. So there's times I can tell that, you know, the person saw my images on Instagram or saw them on Facebook. Mm-hmm. But there's also one gallery in Asheville that it's just a different model, because most galleries don't want you to promote yourself. Mm-hmm. Because if the person buys from you online, then they're losing the sale. Right. But one of the galleries in Asheville wants you to heavily promote your work. And it's just a different business model. Instead of the 40 or 50% commission, it's a much lower commission, but you pay a monthly rent. Mm-hmm. And normally I would probably even discourage people from going that route. Mm-hmm. Because usually a gallery needs to work hard, because the only time they're going to get money is if they sell something for you.
Right.
But this particular one just has incredible amount of street traffic. And I think they feel that, well, I'm not sure what drives them, but they want you to promote yourself. Mm-hmm. And they don't mind if you sell online. So I've also gotten quite a bit of business from them, where somebody comes in, buys something, or just picks up my card, goes home, and then ends up ordering online. So it's been interesting to see.
I was just going to say, in my book, I highlight a couple of galleries that are moving more towards that model of encouraging the artists to promote their own work and to promote, theoretically to promote the work that's in the gallery as well.
Right.
And they themselves are acting as gallery, but also curators and tastemakers through their own social media, promoting all the artists that are in their stable of artists. So I love seeing that, because it feels more collaborative to me. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And just, I think one of the things that I've done, try to do differently, I guess maybe because I was in business before I did art. Mm-hmm. What I try to do with a gallery is I try to be the easiest artist to work with ever. So, I mean, if they want information, I try to give it to them before they ask for it. Mm-hmm. Because I've seen galleries that have heavily promoted an artist's show, and they need images by a certain time so they can get them into advertising, and the artist doesn't get them to them in time. Yeah. Or they show up, they're supposed to have art to the gallery on the 1st of September, and they don't show up until the 2nd. So what I try to do is just be really, really, really easy to work with. And then what I found, though, is when they need something, when they need a quick image to throw in a publication, when they get stuck and they need a show real quick, they'll call you, because they know they can count on you. Yep. So I try to collaborate kind of that way too. Just that I just want to be easy to work with. So anything they need, I try to give to them. Follow their rules, and I try to promote them as best I can too. So if I take an image to a gallery, a lot of times then I'll post it on my Facebook page and reference them, like I just took it to them. So I really want to promote them too.
Nice. Yeah. Those basic tenets of professionalism, showing up, being easy to work with, being fun to work with, all of those things are great. And I can't emphasize enough how often I tell people, like, just do the basics and show up.
Well, what's funny is several years ago, a nonprofit ended up asking, they were considering opening a gallery. There was a gallery that closed, the business was empty, and they just felt that gallery needed to be there. So they invited me to meet with the board and maybe give them some ideas on what they could do. And then by the time I left, I was recruited onto the board and asked to start the gallery. I was like, okay, no more board meetings. But I ended up recruiting all the artists for the gallery, hanging the art originally, and working with them for several years after that. And what you do find is it's very, very rare that an artist actually does things appropriately. Gets to work on time, shows up when they say they're going to. So if you can do that kind of thing, like you said, do the basics, you actually stand out if you do the basics.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I remember I started college a little later than most of my classmates, right? And I did some other things for a few years before I went to college. And I was always amazed when I was in college, like the other college students just didn't quite have the show up and do the work kind of attitude. And I find that to be true for a lot of younger emerging artists as well. Yeah. Okay. So your web shop, like I looked at your social media and stuff, and you're not somebody who has like 1 million followers on Facebook. You've got, I think, 1,200 or something like that.
Right.
But you're getting, significant website sales, you said, and some of those come from Instagram, Facebook, whatever. I also noticed that you also, that you have you're on a lot of different websites, right? Like you're on a couple different, print on demand sites and some site called, I Print at Home and things like that. What drove your decision to place your work on all these different sites?
And what's interesting about that is I didn't know that work was there, so I'm going to have to research that. Because actually, what I actually didn't target some of those because I want to sign these. So I know a lot of artists will do Fine Art America and other ones that will print it and ship it to the customer. But I like, even though it's more time intensive, I'd like to do the shipping to the customer.
Interesting.
So I like to sign the piece instead of having a computer sign it or not signed at all. I like it signed on the front so that they can see the signature.
Right.
And then, especially when someone orders online, what I try to do is do something extra. So I'll give them I don't sell gift cards, but I create a couple gift cards. So for instance, with someone who buys one of the goats, I'll send them a couple gift cards that are landscape images of where the goats hang out,
right.
People that order bigger items, I'll send them a signed copy of my book. And what happened, the reason I did that is my wife ended up buying something, I think on Etsy years ago, and that artist sent them a handwritten note and something a little extra. I thought, boy, that was great, because she wanted to buy again. So that's one of the things I just like to do. I like to try to do something a little bit extra for people. So I've got it recently. She's got my images listed on.
People do appreciate those little handwritten notes or whatever. They like to feel like people are thinking about them, I guess. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So there's somebody out there putting your work on websites without your knowledge. We'll figure that out later.
Right. Okay.
Well, but I noticed you've done a pretty good job of putting Pinterest boards together. Like you've got mood boards set up specifically on Pinterest for each of your different collections. Did you do that yourself?
I did.
Yeah. And have you found that to be useful at all?
It has, and it's one of the things that I probably really needed to devote more time to. I was posting to Pinterest from my website, so that if somebody clicked on the image, it would take them back to the website.
Right.
And you find you only have so many hours in a day, and I probably focus more on Instagram of late versus Pinterest of the world, and do need to do more of that. But that actually has worked out pretty well. I've gotten some sales from Pinterest. I think partly because when they click on that image, it takes them to the website. Yep.
Interesting. I noticed that you've got a couple of photo essay books. There's one called Current Essays on the Passing of Time in the Woods. How do those books come about?
And that's a good question. The first one, Current, I had a publisher who had these essays. So this man originally was from Nashville, moved to Memphis. And any time that he was struggling with things in life, he would walk out into the woods and he would write these essays.
Right.
So his goal was really to have them published as a book. And he had them in different magazines, a story at a time. And so he had a publisher, and the publisher was looking for someone to illustrate the book. And initially, I think she was looking at having multiple photographers illustrate it.
Right.
But she was trying to find something. And she actually found me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So I thought that was just fascinating that she spoke about me on LinkedIn. And then I ended up showing her some images, and she ended up just choosing me to do the whole book with. So it was a fun experience in picking images that went with the essays. And it was a neat experience. And then several years passed, and there was a gentleman that did poems. And it's called Natural History. And I think that was released in 2016.
Right.
And she contacted me again to see if I had an interest. So, and that one was kind of fun because it was, again, I'm not a real poetry person. I thought, I don't know. And so she sent me the poems like, oh my gosh, these are great. Because they were like, 10, 15 line poems.
Right.
And I could relate to them. So I said, yes, I think I sent her back like 6 or 8 images. We went with some of the poems. What do you think? She showed the poet. He said, that's fantastic. So then it was, picking the images to go with the poems. So some I already had that I had published. Others I had taken and researched. For instance, there was one poem, as bizarre as it sounds, it was called Snake in a Tree. I'm thinking, okay, I'm thinking, do I Photoshop a snake into a tree? How do I do that?
Right.
And then ended up, one of the poems had to do with winter, and I thought I had this perfect image, went back. Well, here in that same area, I had taken a picture of a snake in a tree. Totally forgot about it. So that's how that one came about. And this next one that's coming out in next spring is tentatively titled Trails of Tennessee. And it's a book about all the Tennessee state-owned historic sites. And that was one that I teamed up with an author, and that author just kept pitching the idea, the concept of the book. And then the University of Tennessee Press picked it up. So, but that was going around all the Tennessee-owned state historic sites, but the images had to be in black and white. So it was kind of fun. So I was doing some straight black and white, some infrared black and white. So I'm kind of excited about that one too.
Very cool. Well, Jeffrey, I really appreciate you taking the time to sort of break things down for us and tell us a little bit about your photography business. Anybody who is an up-and-coming artist who's still trying to figure stuff out, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I think from a couple ideas. Let me just take a look down here at a note I made. I think I had sent the note to you. But there's a guy by the name of Barney Davy that does some marketing stuff too. It was I think he had 4 tips, but 2 of them really seemed to apply to what I was doing. And one was making art that resonates with a large group of collectors. So, and of course, that's easier said than done because I sort of stumbled into my goats. But the other one was the willingness to create art with a thematic theme. So, the Goats of Rhone took off, but again, it was the willingness to keep that going. So to every year make another goat image, another goat portrait or 2, or retire a couple of them. But I think those are 2 big things, to try to find art that connects with people. And a lot of times it's really paying attention to that, because sometimes this is probably not the best example because it's not specifically directed to art. But when I was first photographing the Rowan Mountain area where the goats are, it was a cold, foggy morning, and I ran into another photographer. And that photographer said to me, hey, there's this great place in the mountains of Southwest Virginia where there's wild ponies.
Oh, cool.
Sure there are. Yeah, in the mountains. And I blew it off that he was just pulling my leg. And then it was like a year later, I looked, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's 130 wild ponies scattered in, mile-high mountains of southern, Virginia.
Right.
And that was another series. But it's little things like that to pay attention to what people are saying. So if people are commenting on your art, really think about what they're saying and try to see if there's somewhere to go with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've published a few pieces on making art in a series or making art with a theme, like you were just talking about. I just posted on Crowdcast and Facebook links to a blog post that we wrote on creating art in a series, because I found that that is probably on an art making side, probably one of the most important things for the artists that we've worked with is making art that has a cohesive through line. So yeah, that's good stuff.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey, thank you again so much. We'll let you go, but thank you to everybody who tuned in. Jean, Ann, Nicolette, Joe, all the rest of you that are on and leaving comments and stuff. We appreciate it. And we'll have a blog post up in a week or two with a transcript of this, as well as some links to some other things that we talked about on the call. Jeffrey, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
Meet you in person here, Cory.
Yes, same to you.
Keep up the good work.
All right, take care.
Thanks.
Bye.